You probably heard about Enonic UI. We mentioned it a couple of times before, and we'll start with why we're building it. A bit of a historical background. As Tomar said, in grandparents' times, in 2015, Enonic XP distro included all of the system apps and Content Studio. And it was a bit inconvenient because every time we wanted to change something in the Content Studio, we had to release both Content Studio and XP. Those of you who work with the admin a lot, they know that Content Studio and all the system apps, they look alike. And there is a reason for this, because all of them are using the same component library called libadmin UI, for the lack of the better name. And eventually, yes, so they're using libadmin UI. And eventually, we have separated Content Studio from the system apps, luckily. So now we can release Content Studio separately, but it still is using libadmin UI. And even though system apps and Content Studio can technically use different versions of it, it adds a lot of inconvenience because we have to watch for the versions and everything. That was basically the reason number one why we wanted to change this, is because our UI component library is in fact an XP library. Because back in 2015, it sounded illogical. If there are common assets, put them into XP library, right? But it's pure client side, and what we actually want is basically a library of stupid components that are accessible in the repository, like npm, right? We don't want them to be smart. We don't want to have any business logic there. We want just a pure UI component library. Reason number two is that we have been sitting on the outdated stack for a long time. We're still using jQuery. We thankfully got rid of Slick Grid, but it happened only last year. We're using something that is called Q, which is the promise library, which can now be replaced with native promises. And of course, everyone wants the modern stack, right? So we wanted something that is evolving, something that is easily maintainable by us. Reason number three, complexity. So I don't know how many of you here tried to actually use libadmin UI. It's not very trivial, right? So yeah, I see Prashant, I know about you. Yes. It's virtually impossible, right? So the complexity is huge, and the tight coupling between the UI and business logic makes it very difficult to use. What we want is easily adoptable components. We want you guys to be able to use them in a simple manner, to build widgets that look fitting in the admin, right? That resemble Content Studio. So this is one of the examples. This is basically the base class called element, and I left this method here because I love the comment. Using jQuery to show, since it seems to contain some smartness, right? So this is perfect. This is basically what we've been doing the last 10 years, using someone else's smartness, but we want to use our own. And then this base element component is implementing its own rendering, where it goes through all the children and adds them to the DOM, and then adds the event listeners and so on. And then it says, OK, I'm done with the rendering and so on. So we had to do all of this by ourselves, OK? And then when you want to use the some element, it will always extend the base element and say, okay, give me the element with the tag name field set, right? Or yeah. And then if it's a bit more complicated component, then again it will extend the element, right? But here it can also do a bit more complicated rendering and add its own events and so on. So again, we had to do all of this by ourselves. Very difficult to maintain, very difficult to keep track of the issues. Reason number 4, the styling. This is my favorite part. The styling is all over the place. Yes, we're using less, but it doesn't help us much. And in the next slide, you will see why. And of course, what we want is the modern framework for styling, right? Easily maintainable styles. And this is the actual example of the styling. So if you want to style a button in a dialog, you would have to write the selectors that look like this, and it's not the worst example, right? And of course, if you don't go deep enough, right? If you are too free with where you placed your selectors, then you can hit other elements which you did not intend to target, right? So this was very difficult to keep track of. And one of the suggestions when we started talking about the new UI was, can't we just change our styles? I was like, be my guest, change this, right? Change this to the new UI. So yeah, this is what we tried to avoid. More reasons, if it's not enough yet. No visualization, so we could not see how our own components looked like, right? We knew, but you will never know. No code examples, no documentation, right? So if you are brave enough to say, okay, I want to build my app or a widget that looks like Contour Studio, you will have to go into the code, study the codes, and look at those terrible styles, right? No documentation whatsoever. And of course, what we want is the engine that could help us visualize our components, where every component has documentation, has code examples for different states and so on, which would make it easier to adopt for developers, not just us. Reason 8, no state management. So again, we would have to build our own event handlers, which would manipulate DOM for every component. It was great in the grandparents' times in 2015, but not anymore. Everyone wants to use the modern frameworks with the state management, right? And the last but not least, and something that basically solved everything, that we started getting the signals from our customers and potential customers, that the design of Contour Studio is a bit outdated, of course, because it's more than 10 years old. And that's where the management said, okay, green light. We need a new design. We need to sell more of Contour Studio and Enonic. And then suddenly all the previous 8 reasons became relevant, and we got the green light.
It's true.
Okay. So, how are we building Enonic UI? So, based on all the reasons that I just mentioned, we had the list of the requirements of the input that we started building the Enonic UI with. to have the modern framework, to have the styling system, to have some kind of interactive engine which would visualize the components and make it easier to try them out. The accessibility was very important, and of course, being able to publish it somewhere that is not Maven like now, where everyone could access it, to make sure that even if you are not building an XP app, you can still use the component library, right? It's important. And the last but not least, the simplistic but beautiful design, and of course, it had to have the dark theme. Very important. So this list helped us to build the tech stack. So we picked the Preact. Anyone heard of this? Preact? Yes. Preact is basically the lightweight alternative to React, and the reason why we picked it is because now we're in the temporary phase where every component has its own root, right? And we don't want to overload the React with all of this, right? So we're gonna replace it with a React when we're done. Tailwind, of course, very easy to use, very endless opportunities when it comes to styling, and not at least being able to isolate your styles, which is very important when we inject widgets and so on, right? When we're going to have the custom inputs, very important that people can isolate the styling. The Storybook, everyone knows it, right? Vegar, do you know the Storybook? Okay, he does. Yes, and of course NPM. Everyone is using NPM nowadays. And for the last one, we recruited our dear friends at Item, who sent us the guy called Jonas, who helped us to build the beautiful but very simplistic design in Figma. So this was our stack, which is basically the cornerstones of the Enonic UI. But there is one thing missing here, right? Modern development is nothing if you are not using AI, right? Of course, we jumped onto this right from the start. Finally, we had a chance to build something brand new. And how can you build something brand new in 2025 without AI? You can, probably, but it will take forever. So, what AI tools are we using? We're using Cloud Code, obviously. We're using Cursor, and we're using Codex from OpenAI. How are we using it? Basically for everything. So we use it to create new components based on our prompt and on the description of our guidelines and best practices. We use it to create issues on GitHub, to do code reviews, to write docs for the components, and of course to create the stories in the Storybook. And how? More technically, yes, it's very difficult to see, but we have a set of rules and instructions that we store in the repo, and then we make Claude look at them whenever it's doing something for us, right? So if we say, okay, create a new button component, then it finds the section here with the context, right, with the guidelines. Okay, it has to be a call this and this, it has to be placed there and there, and so on. So here are basically, it's very difficult to see, but there is a folder called rules, and here you have comments, NPM scripts, Preact, Storybook, structure, and so on. So we basically teach a Claude or whatever agent you're using, how it should work with this project. Okay. Yeah, and the Storybook. So this is how it looks. You can scan the code to get the URL if you like. It's not. It's far from finished, but almost every week we are adding the new components, so it's growing rapidly, and you get the glimpse of how it's gonna look in the end. And NPM, we have released 45 versions so far, and we're of course on the pre-releases, but we need to publish on NPM to be able to have the build cycle, right? Because we're building a Content Studio, so it should have access to the library on NPM to make sure that it's building it correctly. Okay, and this is an example of a new button component. So it looks very unfamiliar to those who are doing React, right? So props, and here you have icon size, you have different aliases for button sizes. Icon can be before the label and after the label, and potentially there can be some children if we're building like an expandable button, for instance. And here we're just sending the props to the button HTML element, and that's it. Very basic, very easy. And this part is a bit more difficult because this is libadmin UI, right? So we decided from scratch that we cannot just throw away everything we had and have Content Studio not working for half a year, right? We wanted to migrate gradually. So we decided that we're going to keep the old Content Studio working while we are replacing the components, right? And how we did it? Yes, we created a new class called legacy element, which again extends the same element, base element, but here is the magic, right? So here it injects the props, and instead of doing the rendering of the base class, it's doing the good old JSX here. And this is the component which the new, and this is the method that the new components will override, right? So it will, if the component is new, then it will never go to the render method of the old base class. Yeah? Easy peasy? No. And this is the new action button, which is already using the new UI button from the new component library, and basically just sends the props down to the base component, right? Here it's looking more and more like React, right? Even though it's still TypeScript in libadmin UI. So we are gradually moving towards the React components. When Thomas mentioned this by stealing my slide, but yes, it's going in QA 2026, and here I mean beta. Okay, so don't be too optimistic. But we have the best people working on this, so we have really good hopes, and the way it went, it has been going so far, it looks like we can do this, and in the QA we're going to get both Content Studio 6 and XP8. And demo. I'm not going to go into the code. I showed it briefly, but raise the hand how many of you have never seen the Content Studio? Fire it. Okay. So, if you all know how it looks now, then I'm not going to show it. I'll just show the new one. And first I can probably show the storybook, because no one has scanned the QR code, which I spent half an hour making. So then I will just have to show it, okay? So let's look at the menu, for instance, right? Menu with the disabled items, okay, with icons, right? Let's go to button. Usual button, solid outline. And of course, all of these are made based on the accessibility standards. So at least level 2 is considered here, okay? Yeah, combo box and so on. Okay, good. Drum roll. New Content Studio, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, this is how it looks now, and the grid, the new grid, and the selection works, and the new filter, and details panel. Preview still works. Details panel here. And just to show you that I was not, maybe publish dialog is worth showing as well, yeah. New dialog, new notifications. And just to show you that I was not lying when I said that we are gradually migrating, I will show you. This is still old, right? So we still have old components living alongside the new ones, okay? Yes, and that is all that I had to show. If you have any questions, then I would like to hear them. No questions. What?
Dark mode?
I thought no one would ask, okay? Thank you, Slava. Not fired anymore.